Hello everyone. My name is Bhavana Kumari, and I am a second year master's student in applied geology from the Department of Earth Sciences at the prestigious Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, batch 2023 to 25. Today, I am going to present on the topic Boudinage. So, these are the contents of my presentation that I am going to follow. So, starting with the introduction, what is a boudinage? Boudinage is a geological process in which a competent, that is, stronger and more brittle layer within a rock mass is stretched and segmented due to layer parallel extension. So, this process results in the formation of distinct boudins, which are block like or sausage shaped fragments that resemble a string of sausages. Now, what is the difference between boudins and boudinage? Boudins are the structures that result from the deformation. These are the visible segments of fragments of the once continuous layer, whereas boudinage is the process through which this segmentation occurs due to extensional deformation. Now, the figure that is present in the right hand side shows the black central layer, which is the original competent layer that has undergone boudinage. The layer has been segmented due to layer parallel extension, forming characteristic boudins, whereas the surrounding lines indicates foliation or cystosity in the surrounding matrix, likely a phylitic or cystose rock. Now in this slide, the first bullet point explains the mechanical setting in which boudinage forms. A strong competent rock layer like a quartz vein is embedded in a weaker ductile matrix like phyllite or mica schist. Now when this composite rock undergoes stretching parallel to the layer, the strong layer breaks into segments resembling like sausages. These segments are called boudins. This phenomena is especially common in low-grade metamorphic rocks, where ductile deformation occurs at relatively low temperatures and pressure. Now, the second bullet gives a concise definition of the process. That is, a boudinage refers to the breaking and pulling apart of a rigid rock unit within a softer matrix due to extension along the bedding or foliation. This typically occurs in layered rocks, where competence contrast causes the stiffer layer to break. It highlights that not only rock layers but also features like fossils, pebbles, and minerals can undergo this linear stretching. This is important in recognizing strain markers in deformed rocks. Now, the figure that is present here illustrates that it is a natural example of boudins in a quartz veins. The host rock is ductily deformed, meaning it has experienced plastic flow rather than brittle fracturing. The quartz layer has fractured and pulled apart into isolated fragments, which is a hallmark of boudinage. Now, this type of structure is often referred to as pinch and swell or segmented boudinage, depending on whether the breaks are complete or partially net. Now, the boudinage can be seen from very small to very large scale. In the figure at the bottom, it shows two examples of boudinage. The first one, that is A. This is a hand sample showing Swiss amphibole crystals. The black amphibole crystals are clearly broken into segments, each about 2 mm thick. These boudins appears as dark rectangular blocks aligned in a row, separated by gaps filled with lighter matrix material. This clearly shows that boudinage can affect individual crystals, not just the entire rock layer. The second figure, that is B. So this is a thin section view, that is microscopic view. Here, the amphibole has undergone boudinage and is seen as segmented blocks within a ductile matrix. Each amphibole boudin is around 1 mm thick. So the orientation and alignment of the blocks help geologists to interpret the direction as well as the intensity of stretching. This slide explains how different geometries of Boudins are formed, depending on the type of fracturing and the mechanical behavior of rocks, whether brittle or ductile. It helps us understand what kind of stress and deformation environment was present during their formation. So the diagram is divided into 3 columns, types of fracture, and 3 rows, increasing ductility from top to bottom. Extension fractures. Top row, brittle, square blocky Boudins formed due to pure extension. These are separated by open fractures and are common in brittle rocks. Now, the middle and bottom rows, that is ductile. Boudins become more rounded and flowy as the rocks behave plastically. Instead of sharp breaks, the competent layer stretches and thins between Boudins. Second, symmetric shear fractures. The top row. Boudins look like triangles or wedges pulled apart by symmetrical shear stress. These indicate simple shear where motion is evenly distributed. Now the middle and bottom rows. As ductility increases, the shape of the Boudins start resembling pitch and swell or sinusoidal patterns, reflecting more flow-like deformation. Now the third one is asymmetric shear fracture, in which the top row shows Boudins are tilted, indicating they were sheared in a preferred direction, not symmetrically. This is common in non-coaxial deformation, such as during progressive simple shear. Whereas the middle and bottom rows, this is even in ductile regimes, this asymmetric remains visible, but the Boudins are more rounded and stretched. The geometry of Boudins is largely controlled by whether Boudins are separated by extension or shear fractures, and the influence of plastic versus brittle deformation. This means fracture type dictates to Boudin shape, material behavior affects how clean or flow-like the separation appears, and lastly, the asymmetric Boudins suggest non-coaxial deformation when strain is not uniformly applied, often seen in tectonically complex zones. Now, this slide shows the mechanics of formation. Now, a competent layer that is embedded within a less competent ductile matrix experiences extensional stress. Then, the competent layer fractures and separates, while the surrounding matrix flows ductily, allowing the Boudins to form. So, this process involves strain partitioning, where the deformation is distributed differently between the strong and weak layers, whereas the slide includes an example of Boudinage from Sweden. Now this slide explains the pinch and swell structures. So pinch and swell structures, also called the naked Boudins, are a type of Boudin where the layer narrows, that is pinches, and thickens, that is swells, but remains continuous. These are transitional forms between an unbroken layer and fully separated Boudins. The slide includes a photo of amphibolite layers stretched within quartz schist from Norway. Adding on to this, so when we talk about Boudinage, then there is another type of structure also appears in the field, and this is known as pinch and swell structure. So Boudinage will be finding mostly in the lower grade metamorphism. On the other hand, the pinch and swell structure are found in higher grade metamorphic rocks. The competent contrast is less between the layers which would be undergoing Boudinage or pinch and swell structure. In Boudins, we saw that it occurs like these square blocks that are separated. It has real blocks, but in pinch and swell, instead of this block, they actually don't get separated, but they form some sort of necks in between. Now coming on to the origin of Boudinage structure. So we can consider a model that needs to have a 3-layer package as shown in this figure. So the middle layer is the competent layer and the upper and lower must be less competent layer. Now the sequence is made in such a way that the rate at which the middle layer would flow slowly compared to the confining matrix layer. Now after that, if we apply a layer normal compression, as we can see here in the second figure, then the top and bottom layers would flow faster than the layer in between. So, if this layer is flowing faster, then the rate of strain accumulation in this layer is faster than the layer in the middle. It generates an enormous amount of friction at the boundary. So whether the red layer here is trying to deform, trying to flow horizontally, but these two gray layers is also trying to pull it away from each other. So therefore, at a particular condition, we will see that this interfere friction and then the outward flow would produce an extensional stress in the stiff layers. So we have some sort of stress going in this direction, and if that continues, so the strain rate in the sequence as a whole exceeds the rate at which the stiff layer can behave in a ductile manner. Then it splits when its strength is exceeded, as shown in the second figure. So what does it mean? That we have generated in the previous slide a significant amount of tensile stress or extensional stress along the layer. So therefore it has to break at the middle, and then the force is still there. So you still have friction continued, and then this separation increases. If this deformation continues, then this block behaves separately, and again this block also have developed an extensional stress within itself, and therefore it produces another fracture, and the same happens here. So this is how it multiplies and the Boudinage processes go on. Now moving on to the next slide, which shows the classification of Boudinage by symmetry. So there are basically two types, that is symmetrical Boudinage and asymmetrical Boudinage. The first one is shown here, that is the symmetrical Boudinage. In this, boudins are evenly spaced and shaped, indicating uniform stretching. We can see that the slide shows symmetric foliation Boudinage in amphibolite facies nicis. The next type is the asymmetrical Boudinage, in which boudins are uneven or rotated, suggesting simple shear or non-uniform stress during their formation. This slide also includes an example of amphibolitic gneiss where boudins are separated by shear fractures. So the next type of classification of Boudinage is based on the shape or geometry. The first one illustrated here is the rectangular boudins. These have straight edges and are common in brittle competent layers. So their formation is controlled by fracturing. The slide shows rectangular boudins formed by stretching a granitic dike in metasediments. So the next type is the chocolate tablet boudins. These are segmented in two orthogonal directions, resembling chocolate bars. They form under more complex biaxial extension. The example of chocolate tablet boudin is given on the right hand side of the slide. Now coming on to the special types of Boudinage. So first one is domino boudins. So these are the tilted segments of a competent layer that resemble falling dominoes. They form in zones of extensional shear where rocks are being pulled apart while simultaneously undergoing simple shear. The blocks rotate as strain accumulates, producing a characteristic domino pattern. So, what is the significance of domino Boudins? So, they are common in high strain shear zones and are useful in identifying the sense of shear and direction of movement in deformed rocks. The second one is fish shaped Boudins. So, the fish shaped Boudins have a tapered shape, narrow at both ends and thicker in the middle. They form in ductile shear zones, especially in the rocks rich in phyllosilicates like mica. These structures are also referred to as mica fish due to their shape and mineral content. So, talking about its significance, the asymmetric tapering helps determine the direction of shear. These are excellent kinematic indicators, especially in myelonatic rocks. Now, the third one is the rotated Boudins. So, the rotated Boudins are pieces of a competent layer that have rotated during ongoing deformation. As deformation continues, the individual Boudin block spins, often lying obliquely to the main extension direction. So, the significance of rotated Boudins is that the direction and angle of rotation reveal non-coaxial deformation and help determine the strain history and kinematic evolution of the region. Now, in this slide, we can show the diagrams of special types of Boudins that I have explained in the previous slide. So, first one is the domino Boudins, followed by fish-shaped Boudins, and lastly the rotated Boudins. Now moving on to the relationship of Boudinage with strain ellipsoid. So Boudinage is a deformation induced structure that relates to the strain ellipsoid. Boudins are usually observed in sections close to the XZ plane of the finite strain ellipsoid. They often show rod-like geometries and in sections perpendicular to the XZ plane. Neither boudinage nor folding is typically seen. So in this slide, the figure illustrates how boudinage geometry is related to the strain geometry. That is a fundamental concept in structural geology. It shows how a single competent layer behaves under different types of strain. That is uniform flattening, plane strain, and uniform extension. Each strain type produces different deformation features, including Boudins, that is fragmented layers, or folds, wave-like undulation. Now let's examine each case in detail. The first one is uniform flattening, that is x is equal to y greater than z. What do we interpret from this diagram? So the interpretation is that Boudins form as the layer tries to accommodate strain by segmenting when compressed from the top to bottom Z but not extended enough laterally to prevent segmentation. That is, the black layer is compressed in the vertical direction, causing the competent layer to break into flattened Boudins along Z. The Boudins are wider and appear pancaked due to uniform flattening. The second case is of plane strain, that is, x is greater than z is greater than y. The interpretation from this figure is that this is typical of pure shear settings where boudinage is aligned with the maximum stretching axis. So, the boudinage occurs along the direction of maximum extension, that is x. No deformation or Boudin formation along the y direction is there. This case shows more classic elongate Boudins along the stretch direction. Lastly, the third case, which is of uniform extension, that is x is greater than y is equal to z. We interpret from this diagram that uniform extension reduces the contrast between Boudin segments, leading to more diffuse segmentation or continuous undulation. So the layer undergoes general stretching. Instead of distinct Boudins, the layers become wave-like or highly thinned. Structures resemble naked Boudins or even verge into folding due to layer parallel strain variation. So What are the key takeaways from this diagram? It is strain geometry governs the type of structure formed in a competent layer. The second one is boudinage occurs when a layer is stronger than its surrounding matrix and experiences differential stretching. The third is a single layer might show boudins in one cross section and folds in another, especially in constrictional strain, that is Z is greater than X is equal to Y. Then constrictional strain is where the rock is extended in one direction and shortened equally in the other two, which might lead to simultaneous folding and boudinage. So, if we want to talk about the applications in structural geology, so understanding boudinage and its relation to strain geometry helps in reconstructing tectonic stress fields, then interpreting strain history of deformed terrains, then inferring competency contrast between rock layers, and lastly, supporting 3D strain analysis in regional metamorphic or tectonic settings. Now moving on to the conclusion of this study. So boudinage is a structural feature that forms due to layer parallel extension, where a competent layer breaks into segments under stretching, often within weaker, more ductile host rocks. It serves as a key indicator of deformation conditions. For example, folded boudins usually signify two distinct deformation phases, while boudinaged folds may arise from a single progressive event. So the behavior of the boudin pieces is also informative. That is, short and rigid ones behave like solid inclusions and rotate with the flow, whereas longer boudins tend to rotate in the opposite direction of the shear. Then the shape of each boudin, whether angular, barrel-like or fish mouth shaped, reveals the viscosity contrast between the layers during deformation. Additionally, asymmetric foliation boudins often point to the direction of non-coaxial shearing, whereas making boudinage a powerful tool in structural geology for interpreting tectonic history. So lastly, these are the references that I have used for this presentation. Thank you. That's all from my side.